a public safety document. And so when people ask the question about what is Iris Roley doing and why is it so critical to have these conversations with CPD or city administrations and all that are concerned and are involved and that can have an impact on how policing is done in the city of Cincinnati, this is what it is. And so when CPD brass, before they even got there, they called me and said, it's kind of thick. I said, I know. I was downtown earlier, was at City Hall, and it took me a good 45 minutes to get downtown. Now, while I believe that Kevin, everyone that I talked to up to coming to opening day, wanted everybody to have a great time, everybody to be able to participate, and everybody to be accountable and responsible. I want to start there. Secondly, I want to say that their radio started ringing while we were at. I was afraid that we would not be able to get to present to the NAACP because it's very critical now 25 years later that we stay engaged in these conversations, right? And not just look at holding the police accountable, because, Kevin, I'm going to say some things today that we need to say, and I'm going to say them to the class as I reiterate all the time. The class of the collaborative agreement is all African Americans and or black people who are perceived as such, who live and walk on the streets of thoroughfares of the city of Cincinnati and who come into CPD and are their agents. It's not just about that. It's about the mission and the value statement of the collaborative and paragraph 13 that tells you why we sued CPD, FOP in the city in the year of 2001. Because it is about other social ills. It is about racism. It is about the lack of opportunity, the lack of housing, the lack of food. It is about all that we understand how we respond to these things. I think what we have continuously seen over the past 20 and 30 years is the impact that those isms have on communities and the lack thereof. And so when we finally get to a place where we say, enough is enough, but what caused the enough? What are our children really and truly going through? As I talked about Government Square and really not watching our children, but seeing them. And you can see the impacts of lack of, whether it's parenting, lack of investment, whether it's lack of quality education, lack of housing, lack of food, lack of health care. Whether it's all these things that we know that are existing as adults, what are we going to do and how are we going to protect them? Now let me get back to last night and yesterday, because I'm going to fight until I don't have no breath about my people. And I'm going to fight for them, but I'm going to fight with them also. Because a lot of this is self-control and self-responsibility. Whether you're a parent, whether you're a friend, aunt, or uncle, or grandparent, whether all of that. Some of this is just self-control. Because it wasn't just youth. It was adults, too. And whether we need to govern ourselves better, if that means not drinking as much, if that even means, not drinking at all sometimes. So some of these things we see escalated because of additional things that we're trying to drown out because of all the isms in our lives, and I get it. But I do want the community to know that I think I had about 10 conversations last night with CPD about what was happening and how they were trying to utilize problem-solving order and fights. There were a lot of calls for fights. There was mace being used by citizens fights. Youth had mace. Calls for service were off the roof for, assaults, fights from northern OTR all the way to the banks. And that's a huge landscape. That's very huge. CPD response was they were using resources as needed. Yes, they did call in the CDRTs. Media isn't helping us with these stories because this misinformation is only feeding into the frenzy.
So Iris, address some of that. What's some of the misinformation out there, and then what's the correct information? Because this is what the platform is for, to try to get good information out to the people so that they can really know what's going on. So what's some of the misinformation?
So I got several calls last night about police being in riot gear. Police use gear as needed, when needed, right? So I'm asking, well, what is the streets around northern OTR, and then you had major operations on the banks? What didn't happen on the banks is what we saw last year during the summer is that the bank ownerships and the restaurants and the bars down there, they created their own special little space where they paid for additional security, and you can only be 21 and over to come into that particular space. That didn't happen, right? That didn't happen. So when the city had to go in to shut down the banks for everyone's safety, and then everybody had to go, even the people from Boston who were here to celebrate the Redskins, right? The use that the terminology that curfew was not in place, not true. And although there weren't many curfew violations, because curfew is not a arrestable offense, and I keep saying to us, be careful what we ask for, because we keep wanting to deploy more consequences on the youth without educating last night to help mitigate the disputes amongst one another. Kevin, last night. Any other questions that folk got? Because I'm not looking at the chat or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of questions in there that folks have. I don't know that we will have time to get to all of them in the 5 minutes that we have left, because we got another guest scheduled at 11. But so here's what I wanted to ask you is so sort of what is the answer? Because it sounds like, you know, Cincinnati police had a pretty good plan in place ahead of time. It sounded like when things broke loose, they did a good job of handling the situation in terms of, you know, limiting injuries and possible fatalities and so forth and so on. But you've kind of touched on it, and I think one of the overarching courses that you'll hear from folk, and maybe things are the way that they are, but how do you make, particularly when we're talking about our young people, adults are a whole different thing. As an adult, you're responsible for yourself, but as young people, how do you create more personal accountability for those who are responsible for these young people who are out there? Because that's what I hear the refrain all the time. People, hey, come get your kids. You know, where are the parents at? What is the solution, or what is the remedy for that? And does that need to be a larger part of the conversation? Because I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, people are going to say, hey, there are plenty of poor people who live in impoverished situations who don't act this way. So poverty is not necessarily an excuse for poor behavior. How do you respond to that?
Well, so let me just say this. For many years, things occurred during opening day to football games in the Reds that didn't make it this way. And I don't know if non-black people were empowered. So we can begin to talk about how do we navigate this very bumpy and nasty and historically racist road. How do we then do that? At the same time, holding all accountable. All those things that I listed to you play a part in behavior. It plays a part. I had a young man tell me on Government Square, and I know this is just diverting a little bit, but tell me on Government Square, Miss Iris, I didn't come down here to get disrespected by you because my expectations are high of my children. But even the ones that I get first, because I get disrespected all day at school. These things are real. And so in the mindset of children who've not had a developed brain, whether it's at home or at school or even after school, in between there somewhere, they're going to behave some kind of way, wouldn't you? And then, Kevin, let's just look at where we live in the world. It's extremely violent. America was built on violence. And I know that the non-black folk will say, well, that ain't, I didn't do